Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome to the final Human Risk podcast for 2019, and I couldn't think of a better way to close out the year than to have an extended discussion with Tom Hardin about some of the human risk topics that we've discovered in the news and in our research. I hope you enjoy this as much as we did recording it. Tom, how are you, sir?
Great, Christian. It's great to be back with you in another episode.
It's awesome to have you, and look, so much content we could talk about, and I know we've got a few things we wanted to kind of go this time. What do you want to kick off with?
Well, before we get into the show, I have a confession to make. I was watching one of your videos in the past week, and you were talking about Elf on the Shelf, and I was nodding my head, agreeing with everything you were saying, especially the point about it being a modern-day Stasi. And I have a confession to make, and I texted you that I also have an Elf on the Shelf in my house. So it's not something I had to disclose, but I went ahead and felt like in full disclosure, I should let you know.
So look, I think a start point is for anyone that hasn't seen this, I'm going to get you to explain to people what the idea behind this thing is. There's a video I've done which basically rants about this product tradition, it's called, that's available. And why don't you explain to people what is the point of this thing?
And fill it in, because one of my rationalizations is I didn't get the official elf. So the official elf, I believe, was created turn of the century, early 2000s by a woman and her mother in the U.S. It's a $30 plastic elf that comes with a book on Amazon. The book explains and tells you the story of the elf. The elf sits on a shelf, as it's called, in the house, and basically spies on children to make sure that they're good and reports back to Santa every night. In the States, it comes out the day after Thanksgiving typically and stays around till Christmas Eve. So for several weeks, this elf is in the house spying, and it's supposed to be moved around every night. The elf moves magically every night. You can't touch the elf. And in the last 15 years, since this has really taken off, really the last 10 years, parents have gotten very creative with this. You can see many Pinterest posts, creatively positioning their elf in funny situations, being trampled by toy cars, or doing something mischievous like spraying, chocolate or whatever all over the kitchen, and just doing these funny things and taking pictures and posting them on social media. So it's gotten very caught on in the last couple of years, I guess in Europe too, or just the US.
I think we keep borrowing stuff that you guys start. So Thanksgiving will be coming here soon. Halloween has arrived. There's no European basis for Halloween, but it seems to have gone crazy. So I suspect it's kind of borrowed and will get larger here as we go, which is why I wanted to put the video out to warn people that this quote-unquote tradition is coming, and that good people like T. Hardin get suckered into it.
Exactly. So my wife and I, our first child in 2009, we thought we'd never do this unless she wanted us to do it. We thought it was ridiculous. We thought the creepy Big Brother Stasi narc part of this was not what we wanted, and not to raise a psychopath. And that was our plan, to hold out and never do this, to be the no elf camp. And when she was about 5 years old, our oldest came home and said, these kids in school have this elf talking to Santa every night. We thought, what should we do? I don't want to buy into this elf in this book. I went on Amazon and Googled the cheaper elf, which is called Santa's Secret Elf Boy for $11, which actually sounds worse. Elf on the Shelf.
To be clear, listeners, we're not endorsing this.
No,
right?
Exactly.
It's not an endorsement or a sponsorship.
And our plan was, he's not reporting back to Santa. His name is Ruby. I'm not sure if he's a boy or a girl, but we called him Ruby. Our 5-year-old loved it every day, waking up, finding Ruby in the house. Again, this wasn't Ruby as Big Brother or narc. This was just Ruby coming in to check in and keeping it pretty simple. It was an old-fashioned beta elf. So, of course, we rationalized we're not doing it based on spying on our child. We're just doing it to have some fun and to preserve sort of childhood innocence. And for us, at least, it's been pretty straightforward. With our second child came along, playing into this. The problem is, though, once you raise your expectations with the child, you kind of paint yourself into an elf on the shelf corner. And what I mean by that was our younger one started writing letters to the elf the day after Thanksgiving. We started writing back, and of course, you know where that leads. You can't stop doing that. So yes. Whoa. So every night there's an elf on the shelf letter from Ruby, and the elf has to move every night. So when it was my night, I think I was traveling, I'd come back and forgot. The most horrifying thing to our 7-year-old was the elf did not move. So here we start lying, which Sam Harris said in the book I reviewed, you're not supposed to do. But I said Ruby had a muscle cramp, just like Dad has muscle cramps during marathons, and couldn't move. So I felt terrible lying to my 7-year-old. and I said the letter would be coming the next day, most likely. So as with many things in parenting, you fight your battles. Many things are polarizing. There's camps to choose from, team elf or no elf. So we are team elf, but with some with some caveats, with the ultimate goal.
Ethical elf. right?
Just trying to always find out ways to preserve their childhood, their innocence, their imagination as long as possible. So that's the way we've dealt with it. But
okay. So look, I think you are, from my perspective, not that you need my forgiveness or that it's worth anything, but you are forgiven simply on the basis that you haven't bought the real thing and that you have de-radicalized your version of the elf, so it's a more ethical piece, and you are cognizant of that, and therefore I think we can move on from this incident. And I do want to thank you for being very transparent about it, because I know that lots of people watch the video I put out there who kind of have done this and have pretended they haven't, or have sort of you've gone even worse and gone sanctimonious around it. So I full respect to you for coming clean, and I'm glad to provide that opportunity at the start of our session together.
Thank you so much. It's always good to have a confession.
Speaking of elves on shelves and espionage, I think there's a lovely link through to the thing I wanted to pick up, which was Facebook, and this extraordinary speech by Sacha Baron Cohen, who I referenced in an earlier session that we did as the star of The Spy on Netflix, but also better known as Borat and Ali G and various other comedy characters, did this astonishing speech where he talked about the nefarious nature of Facebook and the things that it does, and he really just issued a challenge to Mark Zuckerberg. And I think the line that seems to have resonated with everyone is around saying if Facebook had been around in the 1930s, Hitler would have been using it, and they would have permitted him to use it to talk about his solution for the Jews. And I can't argue with the word he said. I think it's phenomenal stuff. It seems to have caused echoes, lots of people jumping on the piece, but I thought it was an incredible dissection of the challenges they're facing.
Yeah, I saw it too, and there was something initially ironic about Sacha Baron Cohen making this argument, being a satirist, but as we said, he had taken on a serious role in the show that you reviewed. As a satirist that pushes boundaries, sets up people for things that he might himself, be one of the first people to disappear from YouTube if his recommendation was taken on. But obviously a brilliant guy. I had a couple of reactions to it. The sort of the larger point about the unchecked, irresponsible power of the large tech companies. There's not a lot of accountability for Facebook. Not much the government can do about that other than calling in Zuckerberg every few months, in front of Congress for TV. Some very good things he pointed out. You mentioned that line that grabbed the headlines, and also that line about the Silicon Six as being the arbiters and amassing so much power. I think that's pretty accurate. You've seen hashtag Silicon Six since that. On the other hand, one of his solutions, which we can get to later, was sort of making platforms responsible for user content, and that'll be, I guess, easier said than done, and would really impact, from what I understand, some of the smaller news outlets who've been sued for this in the past based on one comment from one commenter, where the law currently says in the U.S. that's not something you can do. You can't sue the site owners because of comments from a commenter. There's an exact section, I'm not sure what it was, the Communication Decency Act in the U.S., to which Baron Cohen is objecting. That if that happened, what he was talking about, small news site owners who are really vulnerable to this stuff, as far as I've read, would get slapped with all the kind of lawsuits immediately, destroy many meaningful conversations on the web, but it wouldn't really impact Facebook because they have the money to handle these lawsuits. So a really compelling speech, but I think there's more we could talk about on kind of what do we do about all this.
What I find interesting is that he is saying stuff that is pretty obvious. Right. Yeah. And that's not to belittle what he's done, because I think he's called some things out and stood up to a very powerful force. But he's making statements around the business model that they're operating and the lack of controls and the lack of thought for the potential negative implications of the way they run things. So it's very easy to turn around, a little bit like, and we've discussed this before, a little bit like Uber goes, well, we're not a cab firm, we're just providers of a service, and we're linking people, ditto Airbnb. And so Facebook is just literally a platform people to communicate on. We have a thing in London called Speaker's Corner, where certain rules are disapplied. So you are allowed, it's the corner of Hyde Park, you are allowed to make speeches there, which are, I'm not even sure of the rules, but there's a tradition thing of Speaker's Corner. You can put it as freedom of speech is paramount there. And you're allowed to say stuff to the audience that's gathered there that I think you're not allowed to say elsewhere. And the idea being that is it's a democratic, it's a sort of symbol of democracy, right? Here's a place where you can really say what you think. Now, there's a difference between doing that at the corner of a park and being able to broadcast into people's personal devices, into their homes and into their minds, and to filter into their news feed. But I look at it and say, look, the business model that Facebook's got, obviously, if you are motivated to do bad things, to transmit messages of evil, and you might not see them as evil, but other people might, then obviously you're going to use that platform because it's really powerful. And the reason social media works is that stuff. So he's called out a fundamental of their business model that they have failed to address. And it's like a sunny side only business model, which goes, isn't it lovely? We can connect people. And of course it's great, right? You connect with people that you haven't seen for ages. You can bring families together. I can create a lovely sort of Hallmark sponsored ad campaign that tells you all the good things about social media. But this stuff is obvious if you think about it. And it's astonishing that they're not thinking about that or taking any responsibility for it.
Yeah. And I guess to your point, it's not censoring what's out there, but I think it's the problem that their algorithms amplify the most sensational stories, in society. The worst thing is that's what comes into our newsfeed. I suppose one way to fix this would be to educate people instead of trying to, government bludgeon it into shape or regulate it out of existence or whatever. The real fix is to try to get people to understand what information is, how to consume information, how to be skeptical, evaluate information. We'd love to see a world in which we're all able to do that. But of course, people on the internet who are smart about it, such as people who work at Facebook, who work at Google, are going to know how to prey on people who don't know how to evaluate information. They don't know what the internet is or don't really understand the constant stream of stuff coming at them all the time.
And I think there's something interesting there about stuff we've talked about before. So what you've got here is you've got, let's call it propaganda. Mm-hmm. I'm sure people who are putting it out there would argue it's information, but I'll call it propaganda to be provocative.
Sure.
So you've got propaganda that gets slid into a series of dialogues that you're having with your friends or people you've decided to follow. Right. So unlike, say, people that go to their news channel of choice or their news website of choice or whoever you listen to, this stuff is stealthed in between the update from great Aunt Mabel about her, trip to Honolulu, and you've got your buddies with their kids, and you've got someone, and you've got maybe your sports club that you're following. So this is sat in an environment where you are guard is down because you're with friends. And these are people you've chosen to connect to. And what Facebook does is it inserts this stuff in the middle of that feed. So I'm focusing on the things I want to hear from people I trust. And all of a sudden, they've got into that conversation. It's a little bit like we go to a bar with a load of buddies and suddenly someone, let's call him Vladimir Putin, is allowed to sit around the table and join in like he's part of that gang.
Yeah, and this is something, if people have read the book Zucked by Roger McNamee, the investor from Silicon Valley who's been flying all over, making speeches all over podcasts, has a TED Talk. What he calls this is the filter bubbles. So they can fine tune, as you were saying, and nudge what people believe and use recommendation engines to tell people, what to enjoy or buy to make the behavioral predictions generated by all of the data that, is out there to come true more often. So that's what's been happening the last few years, the impact on voter suppression here in the States in the 2016 U.S. elections, how people spend their money, filter bubbles, recommendation engines have really had this profound impact. And I think, I don't want to say maybe they're bad people running these companies. I think they're very smart people, but nobody's ever said, hey, there might be like a civil rights problem here. So
it's not designed with an ethical lens at any point, and comes back to, I have this one of my rules of human risk is just because you can doesn't mean you should. Right. So because something is technologically feasible or not prohibited by law, or, if I'm looking at individual behavior, I'm working for a company where they haven't specifically told me I can't, then there seems to be this thing that sort of inferences it's okay. And therefore, because if it was really bad, they would have stopped me. Right. And I think we're in a really interesting position in the 21st century where there are plenty of things that are feasible that we haven't necessarily got controls around because the world is moving quite quickly and technology enables things, and there's a load of trends there that shift it. And, if I look at, one of the powerful things that comes out of your talks is the sort of, if somebody had stopped me piece, I might be in a different place. And I think what's interesting here is if we have a human reliance on being stopped, somebody in authority, in law, will catch me before I do something really bad. Here's an example of a massive corporation that's grown very, very quickly, that has influence in all sorts of ways, that is basically not preventing people and therefore encouraging the very things that you've talked about before.
Yeah, I think one of the most effective parts of Sacha Baron Cohen's speech was when he said, Facebook can fix this, they just don't want to. So you could say to Facebook, in their business model, they could have these content moderators, people who make sure the site doesn't misfire. That should be 10 to 20% of your revenue. I mean, right now it's probably less than 1% of revenue. That's one way to start, I think, with regulation. On the other hand, the government coming in to regulate Zuckerberg, all of this, they're so blasé about it. I mean, Zuckerberg may not have another psychological state when you watch him up there, but his thing about not when he says he doesn't want to shut down the Holocaust deniers because people are allowed to be wrong about things, it's not just that I made a mistake when I said the Holocaust never happened, right? I mean, that's something a lot of people, as you said, are looking at this from a content perspective, but it really needs to be looked at from a political and economic perspective, a lot of what we're talking about. There's a way to approach this that we're not regulating the content, but we're putting into place some structures that require, Facebook is going to have to spend some money on this, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's not even admitting there's a problem.
Right.
So every single thing is spun as an advantage. Right. And I'm struck again to kind of take things to the stories you've told, is you talk a lot about, you create the narrative you want to create. Mm-hmm. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm part of a gang, all those sorts of things. It seems to be the same thing on a corporate level, which is he is pathologically incapable, unwilling to admit that there might be downsides to this thing. So spreading of disinformation, misinformation, allowing people who wouldn't otherwise have a voice with extreme views becomes a positive for democracy.
Yeah, there's a talk out there, I'm preparing for this, by a woman, Renee DiResta. We can put that in the notes, but she's had a policy for, I think, a data nonprofit. But she makes this point about amplification, like the entire business model, because she calls it status as a service. About being outrageous requires the smallest expenditure of effort. I thought that was a great quote. So Facebook... Facebook has credit to her, and Facebook has this structured the entire product to produce these sort of antisocial outcomes. So to your point, when Zuckerberg says, I think it was a couple months ago, we're going to end-to-end encryption because I think messaging is the right model, it's such an obvious dodge where he's looking to use end-to-end encryption to absolve himself of responsibility of the content.
Right, because I can't see what's going on.
Yeah, so the wolf of blindness, right.
And my sort of other piece on this is I've thought about, people get very outraged. If a comedian says something outrageous, right, and pushes the bounds of acceptability, people get very upset. And there's a whole thing now about, you can't believe they said this. And often they've said it in a comedy club, right, where so you've walked into the doors and you kind of know your walking thing, and you have to be prepared it's going to be a bit edgy. Because if it's on TV, different discussion. But if you're walking into a comedy club, and typically these things that are reported, the most offensive comments tend to happen where they're not visible, and the media amplifies those things. Right. So in that environment, I sort of say, on the one hand, society is prepared to castigate people who are in a closed environment, pushing the boundaries slightly, probably in a healthy way. On the other hand, we seem to let these people get away with the opposite thing, which is, well, we will have no controls, whatever, because of freedom of speech. And I'm like, if you're going to hammer a comedian for being slightly edgy, and I'm not talking about inappropriate, extreme stuff that we shouldn't be allowing, but there's a point where you can offend people very easily. We sort of, on the one hand, jump on these people, or we're encouraged to jump on these people. On the other hand, these major platforms that are not a case of I have taken myself physically to a venue, or I've logged onto, I don't know, a comedy channel on YouTube, something where I kind of have a sense of this is the environment. I mean, if I don't like it, I can just walk out the door, switch off the proverbial TV. But Facebook is harder to switch off, particularly because I'm not choosing to have this stuff inserted in my feed.
That's right. And I think where the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, free speech, fails for Facebook is at any moment in time, as you said, there's like a million different things they could show up in our news feeds, and they pick the 20 that are going to suit their needs best. They completely exercise full control of the editorial function. They have all these rules that they maintain a very intense editorial process. They manicure our news feed, so they control these menus and choose the things that they notify us of. So for Facebook hiding behind the First Amendment relative to issues like disinformation, conspiracy theories, hate speech, and the like, it's just not supported by the reality of the business.
Look, I think these chickens are coming home to roost. Yeah. I'm absolutely convinced that this is not going to be acceptable, and this bluff, it might continue for a while, but I think kind of everybody is starting to call them out on it, and I think Baron Cohen has done something very powerful there of making that statement publicly. But interesting, and I think, the sorts of things that you and I discuss on this podcast and that we kind of go out to talk to people about play to the fundamentals of business models. And this isn't just kind of an ephemeral stuff. This is, if you start to think about the strategy that you deploy as a business, this needs to be at the center of it, because otherwise you're going to get yourself into trouble.
That's right.
Speaking of which, shall we talk about the next thing? What have you got for us?
So in the last week or two, I was reading an article. It's from this summer in The Atlantic, written by Caitlin Flanagan, and it's called The Problem with HR in the Me Too Era. And I emailed this to you a week or two ago and said, maybe we should talk about this. Obviously, I was hesitant because two men talking about Me Too, I'm sure there's, many things around this issue that we'd missed just because of our biases and not being having any experience, being in situations like this, being harassed. But I thought it was important to talk about, as we are, talking about human risk and human beings and human resources here was the topic. And it was just interesting to me. And my hope with introducing this article and talking about it is just introducing a conversation that's out there. And so I'll often speak, and I'm sure you do too, a company will bring us in with a day of speakers. We have our presentations and our topics. Then if you sit around for the day, there's often a panel with the CHRO talking about these issues, escalating, speak up, that type of thing. And so the article, this author went to this conference, this HR conference, I guess it was this summer, and she was really going to figure out, she was expecting a lot of these people in HR to be saying, sorry for me too. She was using the lens, when it started with Harvey Weinstein, the Hollywood director, as an example of the failure of HR. And she thought, because he had a company and he had HR, and she thought there would be a lot of interrogation about their role at the conference, a lot of browbeating, we're so sorry. But what she found was completely not the case. The name of the conference that she went to was called Work Human. So I think that's just one of these HR terms, right, that has such a sort of a humorous connotation about the role. Every sort of office comedy, HR is kind of made light of, or right, the training or that type of thing. But one of the very strong parts of her piece was pointing out that it's sort of odd to think about humans as a resource along with facilities, capital, equipment.
Right.
But they're the pillars of productivity. And it's hard to conceive of ourselves as just another component in our product, but that's the case. But what she was really trying to make the point is that HR are, it's 75% women usually in that role. And it's often a higher percentage of people reporting sexual harassment complaints, but that the HR person, while being your friend as the employee, is really at the mercy and working for the company at the end of the day and there to protect the company. And that sort of dual role they have is something to think about, where I think we know that HR for the company, that's all, they're ultimately who signs their paychecks, but also there's that balance that they walk. And so I sent this to a few friends in HR, just hoping to get some feedback, and we can get into that a little bit later, but just wanted to introduce it.
I start with the name HR sits on a par with compliance as appalling branding.
Yes.
Right, because it sort of says humans are resources, and I think that start point doesn't help the whole piece. And so you get the kind of human remains and all these other sort of quote-unquote jokes. But any people with HR listening, don't worry. My background in compliance gets a damn sight worse rap, and I think that brand is appalling. So right, this isn't a kind of standalone critique of that. But it's, what are these people here to do? And it sort of suggests that humans are another resource like computers.
Right.
Or manufacturing plants, right, that are there to be managed a similar way. And okay, we need a function to manage those, like we have people that manage the plant or the machinery or the robots to do stuff. And so we'll build processes around that. And of course, the whole purpose of my human risk thing is to say, look, people are massive assets to organizations. They can also cause huge amounts of risk and are probably the largest single cause of risk in any one organization. So if we have a function that is there to manage those human pieces, we need to think that through, and we need to start, I think, recognizing the place that HR and everybody else plays in influencing human decision making. And typically HR come on the pitch for set pieces, right? So you use them to hire people, you use them to do appraisals, you use them to fire people, and it's those kind of transactional bits. And I see lots of HR functions becoming, through no fault of their own, because they're having their costs cut, they're coming under pressure because organizations go, we have a lot of HR people, what are they doing? Well, I just need them to do transactional stuff. I don't need them on an ongoing basis. And so they're kind of being marginalized a little bit down to transactional people. I in the same way that I need to buy a piece of equipment, I'll go and talk to the specialist on procurement. I need to get a piece of equipment fixed. Let's call it learning and development or some sort of, remediation plan. So I'll get the HR person in because I've got a problem with my people. Otherwise, I can crack on my own. And I think that's really unfortunate because, people are the largest single cost organizations have nowadays pretty much. And so it's not being dealt the right hand. So I think that function is struggling with what it is there to do. And because people associate it with its set piece transactional bits, that's the role that they fulfill.
Yeah. And then just getting some feedback from friends that work in HR, sending them this article, and they said, look, HR, we're really not supposed to take sides. We're supposed to be a fair arbiter in these types of situations, especially like when a complaint is filed, conduct the investigations. What often happens, especially with sexual harassment, this is what I'm told from two friends in HR, is they do the investigation. They're pretty sure what is accused happened, but they can't prove it. So you come back and investigate it and say, I think this is what happened. Then you can just call that person, I guess, who's the accused, give them some extra training, sign these extra documents. You understand what harassment is, but go on. Where they're able to act as if it's sort of 5 or 6 unsubstantiated investigations where, okay, where there's smoke, there's fire, then they can react and act. And just trying to always balance that line, I guess, of, when you come in and take a new job, they're getting your benefits, educating you on all that stuff. Like here's this, here's that. They're kind of there for you. But then when the firing starts, when the downsizing starts, then they can flip. And that's the tough role.
I agree. And there's a very strange thing, right, which is hiring processes in firms. There's a really weird imbalance, right? So I advertise a role. I'm ignoring when you go and pluck someone from the marketplace, right? But let's just say normal role gets advertised out there. So we get HR to can you create the ad? Can you put it out there? Do all the mechanics for me, right? And the HR put the ad out there, and then you have an interview process where it's supposed to be a balanced thing where candidate can assess employer or future prospective employer, and prospective employer can assess prospective employee. But of course, it's skewed massively in favor of the firm because they hold the power and they're hiring. So there's a bit of sort of candidate needs to suck up to employer and demonstrate their value. Why should we have you in our team? And then they make the offer, and of course, then the balance flips. And you end up with this kind of sucking up to the person who now has the offer. So the power balance has completely shifted. And you go from this strange thing, the sort of exaggerating here to make a point, but you start from a thing of sort of, you need to demonstrate why you're fit to join us. And then it's like, please join us, please join us, please join us. And then you join, and it kind of gets a bit strange after that. And I think that the whole problem with this process is that we go through those extremities where actually I think an interview process ought to be both sides get a fair chance to have an audition as to whether they want to be part of the other person's gang. Do we want this person in our gang? And you go, do I want to join that gang? Does it feel the right sort of place? And then you should join, and I would like to see that relationship continuing. And all too often there's this power play, which is, the organization requires you to do certain things. So look at induction training, which is something I've looked at in previous worlds. The induction training message, if you work for a large global firm, it starts with you join with a load of other people, and the first message you get is, welcome to X, we're really big, right? And you get loads of stats about how big the firm is. And you kind of go, I know that, you idiots, because I've applied to join you and I've done my research and you've accepted that. So why are you telling me this stuff? And then you get in banking, you get the kind of, and here is our operational risk framework and we will not tolerate any errors, right? And I sit there and just go, the induction training, it's like, this is not the moment when anybody is thinking, I wonder what the operational risk framework is like. What they're thinking is, what have I joined? Where do I get coffee? When can I get out of this god-awful thing? Have I made a dreadful mistake? When do I get lunch? Is there a gym here? Or those kind of basic practical things. And we stuff that up. And inevitably, many organizations, you then get the kind of, you introduce your team, which is strange, right? Because you would think if you were getting people to, why not meet the team beforehand so that you can, again, part of the process to work out whether you fit or whether you can bring something or whether you're comfortable. But you join the thing and it's sort of like, I'm really sorry, your IT's not working. We'll fix it at some point. And the message you get sent from that is, oh my God, my line manager has zero empowerment in this organization because he can't even get or she can't even get my IT sorted, and they know I'm coming. So we have this terrible piece, and then it kind of goes on from there, and then you get these other sort of set pieces. And I don't think we ever sit back as a society and organization. This isn't a criticism of any one organization. It happens broadly, of sort of going, we need to treat people like a valuable commodity, like the valuable commodity that we tell them they are, that we tell the outside world that they are. We tell clients that we hire the best people, that we reward in a way, and we don't think about that. And I think that resources piece of human resources sort of sums it all up.
Yeah, I suppose HR needs a broader and more assertive perspective on its fundamental role to ensure the development and maintenance of workplaces that serve to effectively attract, retain and motivate employees. These workplaces would need to be free of bullying, abuse of any kind, including harassment, sex, race, or anything else. They would also need to be, I guess, free from stress and conducive to increasing employee well-being. I guess having more of a seat at the table with the business. It's sort of analogous to what we talk about when we liaise with compliance officers in our own respective engagements at companies, having a bigger seat at the table, being a partner with the business, being more commercial, I guess, than being so transactional.
I really feel for people in that space because I've come across some really, really strong HR people that just want to be all the things you've just said. And they're constrained by their organizations because it's a service provision, right? Oh, okay, we have to have these people because we're legally required to do it. And there might be something complex when someone goes a bit off because they're, we've got disciplinary with them or they're not performing. We need some help with that thing. So we'll drag them in. And I think it's as with many of these topics, and compliance is another one, is it sort of needs to, if you want to run a proper business in the 21st century, in the knowledge economy, you need to have managers that are capable of handling this topic. And lots of organizations don't promote people that are good at managing people. They promote people that are good at kissing backside or doing the right political thing. And I think if you want to get the most out of people and stop them going off the rails, then you need to have line managers to do that. And HR shouldn't be the kind of drivers of processes. They should be there they should organize those things so that you can focus as a line manager on doing your day job, but they should be there to support on an ongoing basis. And I don't think they're perceived in that way. And so I feel, as we talk about this thing, I feel a little bit sorry for them because if you wanted to fulfill the function you've described, you're not necessarily equipped to do it structurally or indeed in the respect that you're paid within the organization.
There's just been this bad PR in the last year or two, not just with Me Too, but there's been articles. There was one in Fortune or Forbes, why HR is not your friend. And it was clearly a clickbaity article. And I said that.
So you clicked it, right? Obviously.
Of course I clicked it. You're
like, yeah, totally. I'm clicking on that.
This is confirmation bias. Yeah.
Right.
As far as preparing for this. And then I sent it to a friend in HR, one of the big U.S. multinationals, and she came back to me and said, well, did you see it's about Microsoft? She said it should be called Why HR is Not Your Friend at Microsoft. This doesn't happen at my company. So there's this stigma, there's this clickbaitiness. And it would be great to hear from people that work in HR just as we post this, because it would be something to come back to. And I just want to keep the conversation, get it started and then keep it going, keep it evolving, learn more.
Look, I think there's a really interesting piece here, which is sort of naturally, given what I talk about and what you talk about, that there will be various people that we will naturally land with, right? So compliance officers or risk managers will be interested in these things. But I think as you look at the risks posed by human decision making, there are other people within the organization. I mentioned something before, and I think HR is a key component of that.
Right.
And I think that they are not necessarily given the support to deliver the thing they need to deliver. And they are badged with the biggest risk that's there, right? Which is that human risk. I totally agree. I would love to hear from it. And look, to anyone in HR listening to this who wants to come back, feel free. We can willingly bring guests onto this show if you're able to speak publicly and kind of have that discussion. And I want to make sure that we kind of focus on that piece because, what we're doing here is riffing on this thing based on our experience. I would love to have some people who've actually worn this stuff and been through it, and which neither of us have.
That's right. Today, I also wanted to address cheating again. I know we hit this topic a lot, and I hope there's not listeners getting tired of it, but cheating in the context of junior tennis. So if people may not know, junior tennis is the only youth sport that I'm aware of where there's no officials in most tournaments, most matches. You call your own lines. And so in these very competitive leagues where there's a lot in the line in terms of actually sort of junior professionals, hoping to be pros one day, they literally call their own lines. At these tournaments, there's maybe 10 or 12 courts. There might be 3 or 4 umpires that run around, so they spend 2 minutes on every court. And so there's an opportunity, obviously, with a lot of pressure from the parents, from the coaches, to win the match, to win the game, to call lines as they don't see them. So there was a couple interesting articles I read. I spoke to a friend who's a junior tennis coach and have more to talk about there, but just wanted to set it up.
This is crazy.
I had no idea, yeah.
Right, so you're basically telling me that little Roger Federer, or equivalent, is basically when he is starting out and working out whether he makes the big time or she makes the big time or not, there is a key component that they are being given to allow them to potentially save. Now, if you're the worst tennis player ever, you're not going to be in this position, right? So you need to be in a state where you have been built up to this, and presumably you have parental support and you've been identified as a talent to be in the space where this is an issue. So you've kind of been teed up for this thing and you've been set up for this particular career, and then you are given one hell of an opportunity to score things in your not every single point. Clearly, you can't. You only do it when it's on your side of the net, but you have an opportunity to cheat.
That's right. And the parents and coaches tell the kids, look, if it's close, call it out. And one of the other worst things here too, the kids are often told, if you suspect your opponent is cheating, then an eye for an eye. There's actually a parent's guide to tennis, being a tennis parent, that was written a few years ago. And there's this, okay, if they're cheating, you start cheating. So
you are kidding.
An eye for an eye is what this local tennis coach in my town also told me is kind of espoused, not by him, but by certain coaches and parents. And the way that this is resolved in France and U.S. is a little bit different. So in France, if one player wants to question a call and they can somehow get the ref, or they call it the juge arbitraire, that's my terrible pronunciation. So what that individual does, the official, they'll direct the players to just replay the point, right? So that's maybe the fairest thing to do. It's a he said, she said type of situation. The official wasn't there, replayed the point. So you get a do-over. But the availability of that option, what the coach said is it has this unintended effect of encouraging players to constantly contest calls, replay points, even though they had rightfully lost them in the first place. In the U.S., what happens if a player calls a ball out to land it in, no matter how many people are watching, umpires can't overrule unless they were present during the point. And as I said, they're usually not. They're usually on a different court and are absolutely certain. So similarly, also what happens is the players have to call out the score, 15-30, 30-40. If a player switches the score, just starts saying, no, it was 40-30, not 15-30, and an umpire wasn't around, the players have to go back and go to the previously agreed upon score. So there was an article in Sports Illustrated 2 years ago.
You can see what happens now, right?
Where a girl was down 15-30. She rallied 3 points to win the set, and her opponent said, no, it's 15-30. And the official wasn't there. They got the official over, and he said, you got to replay it. So you're down 15-30 again. You have to do it again. This has happened. I read a stat that only 27% of professional players, when they challenge, when there's actually an official there on the line, get those challenges right. And these are professionals. They have the eyesight better than pretty much anybody in the world to make it to that level, and they really get those right. So putting this pressure on the child to get this right, when it may start as, again, sort of, we talked about this before, the continuum of cheating. I didn't show up to cheat in this match. I'm starting to get behind. I can't really see it. It happened so fast, on the line or off, I'm going to call it out. What does the opponent do? If the opponent's being taught eye for eye, then this thing escalates. Then the parents start calling the other child cheater. Then the parents get into confrontations and, as spectators. So,
wow. As you were talking about professional players, so there's several things that go on there in a professional match. Okay, first off, you have this system where they can call it the Hawkeye system, where you can call out and go, I don't think, can I have a replay? And then the computer has replicates it and you can see what happened. But they have the embarrassment of being seen on TV. So you will get called out if you're a professional tennis player and you're constantly accusing someone else of cheating and they're not, or you're calling things. It's an embarrassment factor for you because everybody can see what happened and we can replay it. Right. So even in that professional thing where they've got all those things, they're prepared to push it a little bit because they're competitive enough, but there's a calibrating mechanism. What you've basically described is a free-for-all that massively incentivizes totally the wrong values. Why would you set the thing up in that way?
And if you're teaching children this, what's going to happen when they get into the workforce? They're going to be in a situation like I was in and rationalize something to do that they shouldn't do. And so there's been a lot written about what should we do here. They mentioned the technology. It's called the Play Fair Challenge System. I read it's $30,000 per court. So at these youth tournaments, they don't have the resources to put that out. So that's why they have these umpires running around. The coaches will up and tell the kids, the coach trying to do it right just says, hey, if that kid thinks they have to cheat against you to beat you, then you have them sort of mentally. So it goes back to, again, where I keep pumping Carol Dweck, but this idea of mindset. Right. So if you have this fixed mindset, you're going to start complaining about cheating. If you have this growth mindset, hey, the other player can't beat me without cheating. I'm going to bring my A game, bring the physicality and dominate this person. So to use it to your advantage. That's what the one coach in my town told me that he does, with his kids. If you suspect of cheating, that means they're weak and they can't beat you.
There's one simple question that I know everybody wants me to ask you, right? Okay. So given your experience, what do you do with this? Do you ban your kids from playing tennis? Do you go, I'm going to send them out there with what I could be a disadvantage in this thing? Yeah, how do we handle this?
I think you can't, especially going through my experience, you can't push the idea of an eye for an eye, which is in the parent tennis handbook. Cheat them because...
I want to get hold of a copy of this thing, by the way, because I honestly don't. I'm not questioning this. I don't believe that anyone would do that.
I'm sorry. The title is Tennis Parents Bible for people that want to get it on the Amazon.
As we know from the Elf on the Shelf video, I'm perfectly adept at ordering things from Amazon, checking them out, and then sending them back in disgust. So we need to get hold of a copy of this thing to find out. But yeah,
and when the parents are asked, "Do you put pressure on them to cheat?" the parents never say, "No, we don't put pressure on them to cheat. We put pressure on them to win." And so because all the kids are ranked, right? So if you're ranked higher than the kid you're playing, you should be able to beat that kid. And if you're having a bad day and the kid's bringing his A game, the opponent, what's going to happen? So I would not push the idea of eye for an eye, cheat because they're cheating you. And I would lean towards, when I try to instill in my children when they don't play tennis, is this idea of being resilient.
For that reason, right?
I had no idea.
That's off the list.
We play soccer or your football here, so
ethical sports.
We have officials for that, and we have my other one's a dance. So there's subjective judges, I guess, at these dance competitions, at least calling something. But this idea of being resilient, which is actually very hard for, I don't know if it's hard for this generation, and if I'm too old now, but just teaching kids, hey, not everything is going to go your way. I would hope I'd lean on the side of, if you think that the other person's a cheater, then you have the advantage mentally. Now to go after them and bring your A game.
Wow. So this is one I want to just explore further. So we are going to get hold of a copy of this thing, Tom, and we're going to understand this a little bit more, because genuinely, if this is what's saying in that book, somebody has published this thing, and I'll tell you what we should. I want to try and get them on the show. And just seriously quiz them and go, just what were you thinking? Now, I have a sneaking suspicion, like many politicians, they will shy away from it. But I actually want to pursue this. So
right.
Here's a place for the listeners. We're going to get hold of a copy of this thing. We're going to see what it says. We're going to see that. And we are going to pursue this as a story that we will fixate on. Because I just, for so many reasons, it is not surprising, I would contend, that we get Mark Zuckerberg-ish thinking if we're endowing junior generations who, let's face it, are just doing something that on the face of it, sport is a good thing, right? Exercise is good for you. It teaches you teamwork. And here's a prime example of where it's doing precisely the opposite. I want to know more about this. So we are going to get this book and we're going to find out.
And I'm just pulling up a real quick synopsis of the Tennis Parents Bible. Cheat back, eye for an eye is option 3. So they do say to question the call the first time. And then if there's another cheat you suspect, get that line judge over. And then on the third time, if it doesn't work out for you, they call it, you got to stand up for yourself. You got to cheat back. Right. So
okay, well, I want this book.
Yeah.
We will not have it sent to you.
Oh, no,
because I recognise that you are trying to maintain ethicality in your household. So it will not be hitting the Tipperax household.
No, we don't want the FBI to see that. The FBI should not see that. But
so, I'll tell you what, should we move off this topic onto other things before we take ourselves?
Let's move on. And if anybody has played junior tennis, feel free to just comment, because I wanted to start the discussion too. If anybody has a child in competitive tennis, how prevalent is it? Is it just talked about because we talk about it, or, how much does it go on? I'd love to know.
I'm looking at that sport in a whole new light. We had 2 things we want to talk about as ever to close things out, and I was going to kickstart us off with Peloton, which is this exercise bike thing, which is basically an exercise bike with an iPad that you then pay a subscription for, that feeds in pumped up exercise to your wherever you happen to be, and it's something that's a few thousand for the bike and then $40 I think a month for this ongoing subscription. And they got themselves into a whole load of trouble, right? Because they put this ad out, which if you haven't seen it, it's quite astonishing. I know you have, but it's astonishing, which is basically husband gives wife bike, implication being that she's a bit unhealthy and needs to sort her life out, and she is supposed to be delighted with this gift. Social media blows up because everybody goes, this is not a very 21st century thing, and the share price, what is it, 40%? It went down a crazy amount off the back of a social media response to this potentially slightly ill-judged ad, and wow, I don't even know where to start with that. Where do we go with that?
So it's interesting because I didn't know this ad had been running during American football games on TV for a week or two. And to your point, when it showed up on Twitter, then obviously as things do on Twitter, it blew up. So my first reaction...
Can I just check? You haven't got one, right? I'm now... Anytime we're talking about things people can buy, I feel I need to check in with you to make sure there isn't one sitting in the Hardin basement. I have not joined
the Peloton religion yet. I tend to run outside when I can, or just go to the gym when the weather's not good. So have not joined Peloton yet. But
okay, good.
When I saw the ad, I had the same reaction. She just seems terrified, or something's going on with the wife. The husband doesn't say anything. He looks sort of disinterested, gets her the bike. And at the end of the commercial, she's filming a video blog, a vlog, and she shows it back to him on TV in the wrong resolution. So, and that's her gift back to him. He's sitting there. But then what happened for me is sitting on it for a few days and seeing all this backlash. And there was an article about he's being misogynistic and and all this stuff, I started to feel like this started to be kind of an outrage culture type of thing people were clamping down on. And obviously it wasn't Peloton's intent. It was just sort of...
We're not going, let's portray a really sexist husband, right, who thinks his wife is a slob, and we think this is a good marketing. That clearly wasn't the intent.
There was a viral article afterwards saying husband gets his 116-pound wife to go down to 112 pounds. And it's not about weight loss. And anybody that exercises regularly, it's often not about weight loss. It's about all the benefits from that. Getting up every day at 6 a.m. as she is. She looks terrified in the commercial, which is just bad acting. But I think, the point they're trying to make is it's tough to get up at 6 a.m. She gets on. She's nervous. From what I've heard, people that own the bikes, it is nervous your first ride. Okay, there's relative nervousness we can all be in, but you are nervous the first time you're on this bike and in this class. Get into it. But there's all these benefits that he's trying to that maybe she had pointed this Peloton out to him before Christmas. We don't know the whole backstory, so I was trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she had asked for it.
Right.
He got it for her. She's excited. And there's these benefits to having it, which is what obviously they're trying to get across. And I kind of saw this sort of outrage culture happening as we see on Twitter. Just think, all right, is there anything else that we can write 3,000 words on about misogyny, which I don't think this was the intent with this.
Right. And then it took on a whole new life because we had a few further things, which is Aviation Gin. And I hate myself for this because I'm now giving them a free promo. It's actually quite nice, by the way. I have bought it before, but other gins are available. So Aviation Gin, which is Ryan Reynolds' gin, hires that same actress and very quickly films an ad with her sitting with her buddies drinking this gin in slightly larger quantities than perhaps you would ordinarily, just as a kind of beautiful follow-on that sort of suggests she's broken up with him and that she's drinking this gin to get over it with her friend. Really nicely done, really well shot. And that's piece one. And then piece two is the thing I sent to you, which was the actor that played the male in the original ad is having a little bit of a meltdown from what I can tell, because he's basically, I've been typecast, and she's kind of acting her way out of it, which is potentially acting in a bad thing. You make a joke of it, you continue that role. He's not able to do that because he's been perceived as this misogynist so and so he decides to do an interview with Psychology magazine to kind of find his way out of it. So this thing is it's incredible.
As I texted you, I thought this would be a 24-hour news. Should we even talk about this? But it's persisted for a week or two, and the actress has taken one role to monetize this in other ads, and the actor, the husband, wrote this article or was interviewed in Psychology Today about what's happened with him. But he has, I now follow him on Instagram. He's Peloton Husband on Instagram, formerly Big Brother Canada actor, and so he will try to do his own monetization of this, I suppose.
I mean, it's really interesting though how sort of things. So there's a social media piece here about how stuff blows up. There's a kind of moral judgment piece that jumps in very quickly, and there's something really primitive as well about we've all done this as kids, right, where we confuse the actor on screen with the real life person, and so you get kind of people in soap operas or whatever, and kids kind of particularly confuse these things for understandable reasons, but so do adults, where people get abused in the street because of the character they play. Or they get massive amounts of love shown because of the character they play, and people can't dissect it. And if you're a really good actor, then that's part of the thing, is making people believe it's for real. But there is this kind of thing where you just go, this seems like people have pierced that piece, and what is on social media is reality, right? And maybe this is a problem with Zuckerberg's thing, where we are confusing the two things, and sort of the advert is presented again largely. Okay, it's on TV, but where's the biggest reach been now? Social media, again presented through the same screen, through the same channel that we use for other pieces, and so we start to see it as a piece of reality.
I was confused at that Aviation Gin ad from Ryan Reynolds when he had the actress who was the Peloton wife. Was she playing the character, the Peloton wife, or was she playing the actress herself? With the blowback of this ad, so it was hard to. I think she was the character. Yeah,
it's all the same thing, right. Tom. It's all the same thing, together, right? Yeah. There is no. You're trying to create different characters. She is the same person. But yeah, I think this is it's a fascinating piece and demonstrates that the blurs right between reality and reality TV being a prime example and actual online stuff is becoming more confusing. I think when we get things like deep fakes as we go forward, this is going to become more confusing.
Christian, I want to finish up our last show for the year with a review of one of my favorite books from 2019 by James Clear. It's called Atomic Habits.
I love this book, Tom. Just another great choice. Supremely helpful. Tell us more.
I thought it was too, and through my own experience and trials and tribulations, I've read many self-help books, and really this is the first book. When I put it down, I started applying some of what James talks about. So basically, in a few thoughts here, the book breaks down into an atomic habit is a regular practice or routine that's not small and easy to do, but it's also the source of incredible power. It's a component of the system of compound growth. One of my favorite quotes in the book is habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. He talks about bad habits repeat themselves again and again, not because you don't want to change, but because you have the wrong system for change. And the changes that seem small, unimportant at first will compound in remarkable results if you're willing to stick, with them for years and years. And he has 5 big ideas that habits are the sort of compound interest of self-improvement. If you want better results, then you shouldn't set goals, which is kind of counterintuitive. You should focus on your system instead. The most effective way to change your habits is to focus not on what you want to achieve, but who you wish to become. And then he has 4 laws of behavior change. Number 1, making it obvious, where he says time and location are powerful cues. So using time, I like to meditate first thing after I wake up, or I go to the gym before breakfast, that type of thing. Number 2, he says make it attractive. So to make a habit attractive, he recommends a strategy called temptation bundling. So temptation bundling, something like if you're always looking forward to your morning first cup of coffee, you might want to bundle that with, I'll drink a glass of lemon water, do 30 push-ups before I have my coffee. So that kind of thing you don't want to do, but you'll do it because you're looking forward to your coffee.
Well, which is what we do with kids, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you tidy your room, you can have whatever it is.
That's right. And he says, make it easy. So just remove the friction around good habits, or actually add friction for bad ones. One of the habits I've tried to decrease this last year was my screen time. Every Sunday, my wife and I get the screen time, updates. And one of my child has an iPod and she gets it. And I'm always the leader in screen time usage. So I try to reduce that this year. And what I've been able to do is use the all black background in the iPhone and actually disable Face ID. And my screen time has actually been cut in half just by that little change, removing that or creating more friction for that bad habit. And then he follows it up and finishes it with saying, make it the habit satisfying. So these first 3 things, making it obvious, making it attractive, and making it easy, increase the odds that you perform the action, but then actually making it satisfying increases the odds that the behavior sticks.
I loved all of his stuff, and I've tried some of it. And it just sort of works because it's baby steps to get you on the way. And it's that classic, it's a bit like the couch to 5K. For people who want to start running. I don't remember if it's in the book or if it's in an interview that he did. He was talking about getting someone to go to the gym. Mm-hmm. And so he said, it's really hard to get. So what he did was basically said to the guy, look, all you need to do is for a period of time, get your stuff on, go to the gym, just turn up, hang around for a minute and then leave again, which sounds absurd. But the guy got so used to going that he was like, well, if I'm here anyway, I might as well just do some exercise. And so it created this pattern that wasn't associated with the punitive bit that he might not want to do. It was just like, well, I'm just going to practice going to put myself in a position where that feels normal.
Right.
And I think there's something really interesting in that approach, which sounds really dumb. Why would I go to the effort of going to the gym to change stuff? But as ever with all of these things is if, we are driven, we're creatures of habit, we're driven by all sorts of irrational things. And so having logical approaches to stuff, which is what they adopt for health campaigns, where let me tell you how bad it is to smoke.
Right.
As if people kind of weren't aware of that thing, and therefore making them aware of it will suddenly make them do something different. And I think what I like about his piece is he's really getting into the way our brains actually work rather than the way that we might like them to work.
And one of the best framings I thought he had was this idea of systems work better than goals. I've always been so goal-oriented, I guess learning that in school and early in my career. But then he says, being too outcome-oriented can distract from having, the right processes in place to even make those habits effortless. Just going back to the beginning, not focusing so much on the finish, but just getting started was an interesting framing. It's something that we've all heard before, but just the way that he explained it just made more sense to me.
I like the way that he breaks stuff down and kind of pulls examples from the world. And this isn't one of his, but it's something that occurred to me the other day. I was in a underground station here in London, and the escalator stopped working. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting. If you watch people when an escalator isn't working and they walk on it, there's something weird that happens, particularly when you're going on and coming off it, which is we can't cope with that. Mm-hmm. And I was desperately trying to work out, why is it, right? Because I can see the escalator's not moving, and yet there's something going on here that means I walk in a really weird way and I do something strange. And I did a little research on this, and what I discovered was that the reason we do that is we are programmed to presume that the escalator is moving. And of course, every time you approach an escalator, it normally does. So we have this inbuilt thing that says an escalator is automatically going to be moving, and we know how to handle that. Now, if you behave like that on a non-moving one, you're going to react weirdly because you're compensating for something that isn't happening. And I thought that was an interesting example of we're just pre-programmed because 99% of the time that you get on an escalator is moving.
Yeah.
So the habit that we've built up is to respond to the situation that's there. And I think that's a really interesting illustration that some of the techniques that he has would help to unpick because you would be able to reprogram it. Now, the trouble is with that, you can't keep rehearsing it because you'd have to keep going back to the same location where the thing wasn't working to retrain yourself. And of course, retraining yourself in that way is useless because most of the time the escalator is moving and therefore it's useful to know how to handle it in that. So there's an example of a habit you wouldn't want to unpick, but I just thought it was fascinating the way it's ingrained in us. And I think what he's done in this book is look at, how do we form habits and how do we unpick that and reform new ones? And it's these basic, simple steps that I love. And I think your point around let's focus on having the systems in place and not worry about the end goal makes a lot of sense, particularly where the things that really bother us are massive, like losing weight or running a marathon would be a good example. We focus on the end goal rather than thinking about how do I build something that will sustainably allow me to get there.
One other thing I applied is I'm sure people have, I'm not the only person that had trouble with late night snacking. And one thing I did was, to really eliminate.
We need to know what is the snack of choice?
What was it? Anything that was just in the fridge that looked good. I would have dinner at 6 or whatever with the kids. And what I did was the kids would brush their teeth around 7 and I wouldn't brush my teeth till 9 or 10. I started brushing my teeth with the kids at 7. And then once I brushed my teeth, I don't want to have to brush my teeth again. And so I stopped late night snacking. And it was just that little nudge, that little change was interesting. Like I'll brush my teeth with the kids when they go to bed. And I just don't want to go through the hassle of brushing my teeth again. So I'm not going to go through the hassle of having a late night snack. So it's a really applicable book. As I said, the first time I actually read one of these things and actually applied it. So,
as you say, there are so many of these self-help books out there that are frankly utterly useless, where you kind of read it and sometimes it's just utter trash that someone's just written down, and amazingly seems to sell well because I think people like the comfort of having the book. But this one, I just thought was I was expecting something to be massively overhyped and not particularly good, and I just really liked both the language he used and the practicality of it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So I think, Tom, that brings us to the end of this episode. And obviously, given the time of year, this is the last one of these that we're going to do. But I have a funny feeling that we're going to be back in 2020.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to discussing new topics next year.
That's it for another podcast. Thank you so much to Tom for appearing again and to you for listening. If you've enjoyed this and aren't already subscribed, you can find the Human Risk podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your quality audio content. If you had a moment to give me a review, that would be incredibly helpful as it enables me to raise the profile of the show and to continue to get the sort of high quality guests I've managed to get thus far. I will see you in 2020 for more episodes of this podcast. And if you like the Human Risk content, then do also have a look at the Human Risk video channel and the bi-weekly newsletter, both of which you'll find at human-risk.com. I will bid you farewell for 2019 and I'll see you in 2020 with more episodes from the Human Risk podcast. Whatever you're doing over the holiday season, I hope you have a wonderful time. Thank you so much for listening.